Welcome to RealtyCast Global, where we bring insights and advice from top professionals in the global market. Join us for a journey of culture and real estate from countries across the globe. I'd like to introduce my guest today, Arnulfo Arias, a partner with Navarro Guardia in Panama. And he's quite the celebrity. I contacted him a few months ago. A friend said, if you need any questions ever answered about Panama and about transactions, give him a call. And I did. And he was right there on the phone answering my questions, very polite, very nice to me. And then as I learned more about him and his family, I feel like we're dealing with royalty from Panama now. And you'll know why in just a few minutes. Welcome, and please introduce yourself as far as your background, and let's talk a little bit about your political background too.
Well, thank you very much, Hugh. It's a real honor to be here. This compliment about being a celebrity is of course, exaggerated. I'm a Panamanian. I'm an attorney. My name, as you have mentioned, is Arnulfo Arias. Yes, I do have a long political line of members in the family that have been actively almost since the beginning of the Republic here in Panama. So my grandfather had the same name as I bear. It's Arnulfo Arias, and he was president 3 times here in Panama. So by name, I'm widely known more for what he did for this country than for what I've humbly done throughout my career. Which is an attorney. I've been practicing law for over 27 years now. And I've got involved mostly in the commercial side and as an advisor to industry and an advisor to foreign investment coming into Panama. And I can tell you a little bit about how I got interested in this side or aspects of the practice. And it's because in 1994, we had a change of government here in Panama after a long dictatorship had been in place in Panama for more than 20 years. And as a young man, I was called to preside a new office in the government, which was for direct investment promotion in Panama. So I got involved from that time and really felt honored that anyone really considering investing in Panama was really excited to do so. If you can do a bit of explaining about what benefits Panama has to give out. So ever since then, I've been in the field of the practice of law, but generally, especially interested in promoting investment in Panama, not only through my office, through anyone really interested in doing so.
Okay, another thing about you is the fact that you've written a book. It's called From the Epicenter. You do a weekly column in the newspaper, the Panama American newspaper. Besides the long history of family politics, you're also a cattle rancher, and you have an agricultural green thumb also. So it seems like, when do you have time to practice law, actually?
Well, I consider that the practice of law is something very near to the person that is doing it. You see, I feel that I practice law 24/7 in my life. And it is really involved in every single thing I do here in Panama. Just the fact that I'm involved in a lot of social programs really involves legal work, profound legal work. And sometimes in that aspect, you cannot really value if what you're doing is generating what we really need for the country. But what I'm hinting at is that law is everywhere and in anything that I do. And it has been like that for a long, long time. Even in cattle ranching, it is involved because I've helped out to create new possibilities of regulations for cattle owners here in Panama and help out existing associations of cattlemen too.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of Panama? I mean, I know that most people understand the history, but could you go a little bit deeper into it and tell the audience about the history of Panama and some of the aspects of it that we really need to know before we plunge into how to do a successful transaction, a real estate transaction in Panama?
Okay, that's a very important aspect, and I feel really proud to be born in a country like this one, because Panama has really been given a very important task of serving the world. And it is a task that comes into being even before men exist. Here in Panama, we have a coat of arms that had been enacted since 1904, and it bears the statement "Pro mundi beneficio," and "Pro mundi beneficio" means for the benefit of the world. So our forefathers knew since then, when the republic was born, that we really engaged in a great task of serving the world. And this task really comes about in a geological form, even 3 million years ago, when the Isthmus of Panama rose from the sea. Because from that time, the geographical task of Panama was dividing the two oceans. The Gulf Stream started changing its patterns, and actually the globe started warming up because of the existence of Panama. And there's quite a lot of studies done on this matters. So there's even theories that hint to the role that Panama played throughout this procedure of warming the planet and making men really go from the African continent upwards, because the planet had warmed at that time. So even you can consider that to be an excessive pride, but for us here that know this, we call it a task that is embedded in us from the very beginning of the existence of Panama. So in that same turn of events, men has also taken advantage of this position of Panama. And as you know, the Americans decided to take on the huge, enormous task of creating a canal here in Panama and united those two oceans that had been actually separated through this canal that is actually in place. And 5% of the total amount of commerce in the world goes through this canal right now. So we feel really, really proud to be a part of this and to share in this huge task of serving the world.
Yeah, excuse me. I was fortunate enough to be there in Panama in 2016. The International Real Estate Federation had meetings there, and I was there and got to visit the Panama Canal Zone. It was just an awesome place to be and see the entire. We were in Panama City, of course, and see the town, see some of the villages out away from Panama City, and even down to romanticizing like the fruit stands and things like that on the highways. I mean, those were beautiful, beautiful fruits and vegetables that were grown right there in Panama, and I mean, it was just a lovely place to be. I know that it was in August 1st through the 5th of this year, the U.S. Panama Business Council had a time to come there, and it was promoting your properties. I missed that, but it wasn't only promoting commercial and residential properties, but you had symposiums about how to do business there and things like that. I'd like to know if you had a great attendance. I hope you did, and a few of the things that you covered, because I'm sure that you participated in that symposium during that week.
Yes, I had the honor to participate in as a guest, as a speaker, and basically provided a few hints and tips in in issues pertaining to the questions that I've been hearing for over 27 years of anyone that is interested in investing in Panama. So I already had those gathered together and was able to at least provide them with a general idea of what I recommend that someone should do if that person is interested in investing here in Panama in real estate. So I concentrated on that, and that was what I gave to that symposium when it took place.
You know, we need to look at, first of all, let's do this, so that our viewers can know more about the transaction itself. And that's the reason I was calling you. I had several people on the marketing platform we have at Global Property Pros. We operate a global or an international platform of marketing. And one of our members of GPP, and you can see it right here,
yes,
had a question about the whole transfer, and it sort of got it got complicated because in the U.S. we refer to one thing, in Panama you refer to it another way, and I mean even down to earnest money. I mean, you know, we have a way of collecting earnest money, and the attorney actually has a fund, a trust fund that he keeps the money safe and sound in, but you don't do that from what I understand in Panama. The bank actually is the holder of the, what do you call it? The trust fund or the deposit, I guess the deposit. It's not really referred to as earnest money per se. But so that was the beginning of my conversations with you. And so I think one of the first places we should start would be about ownership rights. I mean, just say that I'm a buyer, I'm in Panama, and I find the property. I find the property that really suits my needs and want it. So number one, how can I be assured that I can have full ownership of the property once I choose it? And then how do I get from point A to point B and to a closing?
Okay, I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible.
Okay.
So we can start by addressing the first question that I usually get, and it's that tendency to have some inquiries about the right of ownership by foreigners. Okay, so regarding real estate here in Panama, we have a special situation regarding ownership, because ownership of real estate has not only been legalized by a bill, it is part of our constitution here in Panama. So taken to that level, the right to own property is constitutional. And by that, I mean that our Congress cannot change any of those rights by imposing any bill. So that there gives you immediately a sense of easiness that the property you have will not even be changed under law. You would have to change the constitution to change the right to the property here in Panama. So that is the first thing that I usually tell somebody that has this inquiry, and it's a bit fearful, if you will, of our Latin American system. So here in Panama, no, you have a constitutional right to own property. And the second, which is even more important regarding the fact that a foreigner would come into Panama, is that foreigners and nationals are equal under the Constitution as well. So that means that the right to own property is the same for me as a national that it would be for a foreigner coming in and buying a property in Panama. And that gives a sense of assurance that the investment you make will be protected just as if it were a Panamanian buying a property. Okay, and no bill issued by Congress here in Panama could change that reality. Now, that does have a specific limit, and I'm going to share that with you right now, but it's also a limitation that is only created by the Constitution, and it's the fact that foreigners cannot own property within 10 kilometers of each border of Panama, meaning from the border of Colombia and from the border of Costa Rica. Okay, but that has been institutionalized by Constitution. So it's not an imposition. It's really part of the balance that is there set in since 1904 for this situation of property. So with that in mind, I can go then a bit further into how to start knowing about properties here in Panama. Okay.
Yeah, let me ask one quick question. What about property use? Is there any type of restriction on the usage of the property?
No, absolutely. So long as you respect the third-party rights, and I'm going to be heading on to give you a bit more information how you can find out if there are any restrictions or limitations, because any restrictions or limitations here in Panama for properties must be publicly known. So before you get into buy a property, you will know what restrictions you have beforehand. Okay, so in that way, no limitation at all, unless it's a registered limitation, which we're going to be talking about when we address the way to do a title search here in Panama.
Okay.
I consider the first step into getting into a property knowledge. You have to really search or conduct a search here in Panama. And a search here in Panama is different than a search in the US. Here we have a public registry that is centralized. And by centralized, I mean that each and every property has a specific number. So you can track it all the way down to its existence, its history, its obligations, and even its restrictions, which is what we had talked about. So this system is a public system which anybody can access. But when it's a foreigner coming in to do a title search, usually I advise that he hires somebody that has the knowledge of this title search, because even though it's meant as a do-it-yourself tool, you can go through the internet from anywhere in the world and check out a property. There could be something you miss, and that would not be a good experience to have. Okay, so I immediately say we have this wonderful public registry system, is updated on a daily basis. There's no information that can be compromising if it's not there. But you do need somebody advising at the moment of doing this title search, because it's not mandatory, of course, but it's mostly recommended and highly recommended by somebody like me who has had to treat people, and I say treat because they've gone through horrible experiences because of this lack of information that we're now trying to provide. Okay, so if you have any questions about that public registry, of course, I will be willing to answer them, but it's a very, very simple and accessible system.
I think it's very interesting that you're talking about the entire country of Panama having this registry system that anyone can access.
That's correct, Hugh. That is correct. And I wanted to just let you know that it has been so effective that it has been running since 1916, without interruption. Of course, it used to be manual registration, of the properties done by hand. But now everything has changed. Everything is computerized and scanned. And it has been considered so important for the legal security of Panama that part of this procedure and structure of the public registry you will find in our civil code. Okay, so that level of importance is actually given to the public registry.
I see. Has there been any developments of blockchain within that system? Has anybody tested that, or have you heard any rumblings about bringing that into Panama?
Well, it's so effective that it's actually, I cannot say that there's no ways of trying to, how can I say, pierce it. But those are on the illegal sides, and we really don't need to deal with that because it would be illegal. There's no way of tampering because I will go into that in the next questions that I hope to answer for you regarding
Okay.
how to go about buying property.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
it's a very, very safe procedure if you do it right. Just like anything, if you don't do it
I
right,
think,
the problems.
yeah, and I think that's the, it sounds like you have been involved with people that come in and do it the wrong way, and you have to try to clean it up. But if you start the right way, you're going to be able to make sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed by the time you get to the closing and have full ownership of the property. So no title insurance, is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. That's what I feel says this is a very updated system, accessible system, no way to tamper with it. Once you see a public deed of sale posted in this system, it cannot be changed anymore. You see? So the information you get from there is actually very valid. And you immediately ask for it to be certified in official documents. So there's no way really to have this risk of buying some property that does not belong to the person that owns it, because you will be able to see up to the last minute who owns it. Okay, so that procedure of purchasing will ensure that your advisor will always be tracking how your documents are going, and there's really no way to contest something of this nature if it's done correctly.
That makes perfect sense, and it's really a simple approach. I mean,
Yeah.
Since you have everything documented, and back, I think even with title insurance here in the United States, maybe it runs back only 50 years, maybe, as far as guaranteeing the title. You're talking about much further than that with your documentation.
That is correct, and it's important that we talk about this. I know we're short on time, but when you buy a property that has been registered, let's say land, the initial number of this land that was issued back since the existence of the republic would not change if nobody had sold it. So it would be exactly the same. And in that way, you can track a property all the way down to the first initial enactment of the property. So that's very important.
Well, if we go step by step, let's do that. I think there's about 5 steps that you've mentioned that we need to follow when you're purchasing in Panama. And if we could just start step by step and go through those 5 steps, I think it would be very important to let our listeners hear and understand that particular process.
Okay. It may not be needed. It may be, you've probably heard this so much, but again, when you're buying property in Panama, it's important to get in touch with a licensed broker. Okay, very, very important. Here in Panama, real estate agents are licensed under law. Okay, so you must make sure that they have the accreditation to act as such. So that step is very important as well. I know that people can do things on their own, and it's fine, but it's a high risk, and I think that's why some people commit this type of mistakes from the beginning, because they don't go to the right individuals. So the first tip, I would like to call it that, would be to contact a licensed real estate agent. And licensed real estate agents here are usually members of associations, okay? And those associations are, of course, enacted and legalized under law, and that gives you a sense of security as well. So you go to a licensed real estate agent, and they will have a multiple listing, which is very important, because that multiple listing means that those properties have already been screened. Okay, so once that property is placed in a multiple listing, there's a lot of things that just shorten the amount of time that you need to actually make your decision. Okay, that would be the first tip. The second one would be to make sure that this title search is actually conducted through the public registry, which we had talked about. And again, it's a simple search, but it has to be done by somebody that has the keen eye to spot any single situation that could rise with that property, not only past, but future, even after you buy it. So when I advise in a purchase, I always make sure that we go as further as possible with the property, and we actually tell you what limitations you could have in the future. And that is very important, because if you're buying for a home, it's different than if you're buying for building, a condominium. So all of that must be studied and given as advice before you get it in. So it's very important that this title search be done properly, and that you feel absolutely satisfied after you receive this title search, because you will probably have absolutely no doubts about your decision, okay? Once you have conducted this title search, then and only then would I say you're ready to make an offer, okay? And here comes the catch. A lot of people think that just by making that offer, the other person that it accepts is already binded to it. It doesn't work like that under our civil system here in Panama. What I usually recommend is that after you make that offer is then taken to a further commitment that we call a pre-sales agreement. It's a promise to purchase and sell agreement. And this agreement is within this regular strand of purchase of property, because with this pre-sales agreement, you're going to be stating specific things such as what amount of property, if you're buying land, specifically what amount of property, a total description of what you're purchasing. If it is already a registered unit, you will immediately be able to commit the seller to the existing surface, for example, to if you're buying with some items within the property, you're making sure in that pre-sale agreement that is already stated there. You will know the condominium fees and how much they are beforehand. So doing this pre-sale agreement is, in my view, very important, because you're going to get a feel for the property even before you buy that property. And later on, after you purchase, you will not be able to change your mind anymore. So it really makes sense, and I always advise to start off with this pre-sales agreement. And I'm going to tell you what a pre-sales agreement would imply. The person that is selling, what you want to do is make sure that they get the piece of property out of the commercial market. If you're really sure you want that property, then you want that property out of the market. No further offers from that moment on. In order to achieve that, you need to have that set down in writing through a pre-sales agreement as the one that I am mentioning, okay? So you mentioned this earnest money, okay? The earnest money, which is something that always happens because it's within the regular practice here in Panama. In the US, you probably are very familiar with the escrow when buying property. But here in Panama, escrow is not legislated, okay? So there is this is something that must be addressed in the pre-sale agreement. And there are two types of earnest here in Panama. One earnest is called confirmatory earnest, meaning that the money you give as upfront, you cannot turn back on it. And the seller will not be able to legally turn back either. So what you're saying is an advance. This is an advance of the sale that we're both committing to. Nobody can turn back, okay? That type of earnest will imply that if somebody defaults, then we take it to court and enforce the sale, because both parties were already in acknowledgement of that. Now, that is one of the options you have. And the other options is what we call a penalty upfront, okay? Which is almost the same, but what you do is you are willing to lose part of that money that you're putting up front. And a lot of people don't know that. They put this earnest in the transaction, and they didn't really know that they were about to lose it if somebody, if they backed up. So let's say you're a buyer and you say, I'm putting this, you take the property out of the market, and you did not know you had this penalty. And then you say, well, I'm backing off, I like another unit, give me back my money. That's not possible anymore. Okay, so you must be crystal clear when you do this earnest, because what happens is when earnest implies that it's a penalty, the buyer has to be willing to lose it if he backs up, and the seller has to return that amount of earnest doubled if he backs up. Okay, that means that they're both in a balanced situation. Okay, and it's very important to clear that up beforehand. And I've seen a lot of lack of acknowledgement in this, because it's something that must be studied and known. We don't expect for anyone buying to know these things. We have expertise to tell them how to do it. Okay, so once you have this pre-sale, then that pre-sale, you still don't have the property. Okay, that pre-sale is just the commitment of how you're going to be going to the closing, the time frames, the amount of the price sale, all the details you want to get in there, we get into that pre-sale. But then after you are ready to close, then we must transform your will, both the wills of the seller and the buyer, into what we call a public instrument of sale. Okay, this public instrument of sale is a deed of sale. In order to carry out a deed of sale, you must do it in a notary public here in Panama. And it will require the presence of buyer and seller before witnesses. Okay, so there you set down the will in a very short minutes that is written under the obligation of a law by an attorney. They cannot just go in there and do it themselves. An attorney must be responsible for the drafting of this public deed of sale. Okay, so when the buyer and the seller go in together, they usually go with both attorneys that represent them. And then we take this minutes of sale, already countersigned by us as attorneys, and that document is the framework that is used for the deed. Everything is very simple as far as the terms that it must include, because you already know what you're buying. You see, so what we lay down there is the acceptance of the purchase of this specific property with the information that is included in the public registry. So you don't have to go ahead and make an encyclopedia of this agreement. It's very short, simple, one page, but it must be done before you can own that property. Okay, this public deed of sale, we do it in one single day, and then comes the final phase, which is taking that public deed of sale and recording it for public knowledge. That recording for public knowledge usually takes about a week. And after that, you're completely on legal ground and proud owner of a property in Panama. Okay, it may sound a bit overwhelming, but it is not. It's just simple sort of cooking recipe steps that must be taken and cannot be avoided. Okay, so that would be the tips, Hugh, that I would give everybody.
Let me ask you this about the earnest money. So you don't have a trust account in your firm where you hold the money, actually. That's held by a bank that would be designated to hold trust money. Is that true?
No, okay. So let me tell you what happens. When you ask for an earnest, you're asking for an upfront that in the market should not be more than 10%. Usually, okay? You wanna take that property out of the market. The buyer should be willing to put upfront at least 10%. but you don't put it in a trust account or anywhere of that nature. Usually, the agreement is to give it to the seller.
That's right. Okay.
Immediately to the seller. So, but there's a balance there. You just given the upfront of 10%. I usually don't recommend you give more than that. Okay, you give that 10%, everything in writing, everything laid down in a pre-sales agreement. You don't give it out of that agreement framework, never. Okay, so you first sign the pre-sale agreement, and then you can entrust that 10%. Now the balance is where I usually ask that it not be paid without using a bank or without using some type of engagement of security. And this is why. As I've explained to you, our registration system is very simple, but anything you register there is immediately enacted and presumed to be legal. So let's say you pay the money, including the balance, and your deed has not been recorded. There you could be in trouble, okay? And then you've already paid that entire balance of the sales price. The way to avoid that is to use banks here in Panama, okay? Because a bank will issue a promissory letter of payment to that seller, telling him that once he shows the bank that you are already title owner, then the bank releases the money over to them. It's sort of an escrow, okay?
Sure.
That is a simple, very secure manner to ensure that that balance doesn't go prior to the registration of that deed, okay? So, because I want to explain to you the other side that could happen. You go ahead and register that deed, but the seller has not received your funds. So what happens then? For the purpose of the public registry, you're already the owner, but you've not canceled the sales price. So there you could have inquiries on both sides. They're both very hesitant. So we have to look for ways to make this a secure transaction. And the banks is only one way, but we can work out other ways, like placing that certified check, for example, with the attorneys that have been appointed, and then he only releases it once the title is secured.
So, I mean, you've certainly amplified the fact that the foreigner doesn't need to come to Panama and think he can handle the entire transaction start to finish without having professional help to assist along the way. I mean, it seems like it's a little bit more complicated than we have here in the U.S., but yet on the other hand, your system works, and with someone like you involved, then they can be guaranteed a smooth transaction. Can you give us maybe a situation you've been brought into by a buyer or a seller, and when the transaction just went wrong and you had to get in the middle of it and help straighten it out? Do you have any stories like that? Maybe one that you could share with the wrong way the buyer or the seller actually, did the transaction, and how you had to get in the middle of it and work it out so that they could both come out winners on the other side?
Yes. I'll try not to bring out horror stories, because
but we need to know. I mean, we need to know, because we don't want someone walking into Panama and ending up in your office because they didn't do it right to begin with. I think that's my thought process here, to give one example of when it went wrong.
Okay, and I sincerely appreciate that, because it will give me at least the hopes that anybody coming into Panama really seek advice from the beginning. Well, I can tell you what happens, not just once, it happens quite a lot. So I'm not just going to give you one story. I'm going to give you a story that just happens again and again. Some people think that by just signing a pre-sales agreement, they become the owner of that property. So I've had clients walk into my office with a pre-sales agreement saying that they don't know why they're still not owners of the property. And I've had to walk them to the tips I just gave you and explain to them why they are not the legal owners and why another person is still the owner of that property. So what happens is, I think that there should be responsibility on a transaction of this nature by both the seller and the buyer. The seller should always be open and commit himself to making sure that the transaction is wrapped up all the way until the end. He cannot just receive that money and let the other person solve the issue, because this, I don't want to call it ignorance, but it's rather a lack of knowledge. It's not a potential issue on just the buyer or just foreigners. It happens to nationals that think that once they have issued this type of commitment in a pre-sale private agreement, everything is done. Well, that's not the fact. That's not the fact. And it happens between friends. It happens between people that have some level of trust, that think that they have already solved issues, paid monies, and you have to take it all the way until the end. And that's the simple manner of doing these things. Now, I can assure you that even in the worst case scenarios, we can solve it, so long as there is writing in the way, so long as there are documents, because it's very hard to solve a situation where you don't have any documents. And that also I have seen, okay, where there's not really receipts of money, where there's nothing, then it makes it even hard for us to make miracles, which we're not bound to do, okay? We're just there to commit ourselves to practice law in the most responsible manner and make sure that even if you have a problem, we can take it with legal actions for a solution. But I always ask the client to bear some level of responsibility before bringing a case, because that's part of life, you know, and we cannot promise something that we cannot do. So when it's a really difficult case, I just must turn it down because I don't have ways of helping out. But that has happened just very few times in my life.
Well, listen, we really appreciate your time today, because I think you hit it right on target about all the elements involved, start to finish, in purchasing property in Panama. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your time here with us today. And I know that it's great information for the listeners, and I look forward to the next opportunity to sit down with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hugh. I've been delighted to be here.
Thanks for joining in on today's episode of RealtyCast Global. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast to be notified when new episodes air.